He is one of the giants of American journalism and the most notable lone wolf of his generation. Seymour Hersh has spent a lifetime stunning the world by breaking stories such as the My Lai massacre in Vietnam and the abuses at Abu Ghraib prison. For his efforts, he's been awarded a Pulitzer, 5 George Polk Awards, and 2 National Magazine Awards. His new book chronicles his illustrious career in which he has ticked off just about everyone who's anyone in power. It's called Reporter, a Memoir. And Seymour Hersh joins us now for more. It's great to have you here.
Yes, ticked off. I like that phrase.
Ticked off. Well, it's a family show, so I don't say anything more harsh than that. This, it's interesting. You were going to be writing a book about former Vice President Dick Cheney, and then somehow this came out of the mix. What happened?
Obama, in his second term, cracked down on leaks. And so I had worked out with a couple of people who worked for Cheney. Cheney was interesting because he's very bright. Very conservative, but as Secretary of Defense, he was Secretary of Defense in the first George Bush government. And in the first Gulf War, he ended the war quickly because it was a slaughter. And he was a rational, conservative guy. He gets to be vice president, probably because the father, old man Bush, wanted him to be. He knew how weak his son was, the George Bush II. And he's vice president, and he's chugging along, and he brings in a couple of old buddies of his who are smart guys to be sort of a kitchen cabinet. And then 9/11 happens. He loses his moorings. He wants to go to war with Iran. He wants to attack the Middle East. He wants to recreate the Middle East so there's no threat to anybody.
Sounds like a good book for you.
And he wants to keep a necklace around Russia, too. And so it got scary. And his propensity for secret operations, black prisons, and he was financing a lot of stuff. I can say this much without congressional money. He raised money. He had secret bank accounts in Europe. He wasn't a thief. This was all money that he could collect.
But this was the book you were going to write.
I was doing this book. The deal I had with the two or three people who were inside who came to me because of the lying was that I talked to them every 3-4 weeks, and then at the end of the 8 years, when a new president was in, I'd write a book. And so by the time I got ready to 5, 6, 7, 8 chapters that I needed them to look at to make sure I didn't tip off Cheney, to whom I didn't want to give any clue to whom I was talking. There were people he's still friendly with. He didn't know, and he's still alive, unfortunately, I guess. Anyway, they said you can't publish it. A, he'll find out. He'll know I'm the guy who knew this. And secondly, Obama is going after people. He's going after people who leak secrets. He was tough. And so is Trump, but Obama started this ganging up on any press leaks.
It is ironic, right? I mean, everybody thinks that Trump did say that folks like you are the enemy of the people.
Right.
But in fact, it was Barack Obama who started to crack down on journalists much more.
And there were some people that were prosecuted on the inside who took pleas that the public didn't even know about it.
Yeah, but we're getting off the path here. Somehow that Cheney book fell to the wayside.
Well, I couldn't do it. And
so the memoir came forward.
Well, I've been living off my Sonny Mehta, the publisher of Knopf, was wonderful. I got money to live on for 4 years while I was doing the book. And so they said, do a memoir. And I said, I never thought I'd write one. And of course, it was fun. I mean, we have such egos, anybody. We all do, particularly in the media. And no offense, you might not have. I don't know you that well.
I have not written a memoir, nor will I ever.
Well, I didn't think I would. But it turned out to be, you can't do the kind of writing I did, nonfiction, straight fiction, and narrative. It's harder than you think to make a story explicable. And also, so I knew I could write, and so it was fun. And because they use the word legendary, I think a lot of people think I'm dead. Some of my and so I got wonderful notices. It was,
Sir, you are only 81 years old. You got a long way to go.
I am more like 300 years old. Actually.
No, you're not. You're only 81, and I'm waiting for your next big scoop. Anyway, this career that's lasted more than half a century, obviously, started because of a poker game? You want to tell that story?
I grew up with immigrant parents. And we had, a warm bed and good food, but the kind of nurturing, my father was from Eastern Europe, and communication was something he didn't do. His whole family was wiped out by the Nazis in Lithuania. Never talked to me about it. There was no mention of it. It just was, there was a limit. So I was self-educated when I was expected to get good grades, but nobody, they didn't coo when I brought home A's. And so I was a reader. I joined the Book of the Month Club when I was 13 and used to pay 99 cents a month for the annual nonfiction, which most of the time in the 50s was anti-communist stuff by J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI, but there was histories. Anyway, so I became educated in a funny way. And I did get a scholarship to the University of Chicago, but we had a ghetto business. My father got cancer when I was 15, and I ran it for 6, 7 years. So I grew up working in the black ghetto in Washington, understanding it, in Chicago rather, in the south side of Chicago. Studs Lonergan, if you know that famous writer, in the 30s it was an Irish neighborhood, it became black. This is the sort of the natural migration pattern we have in America, probably here too. Anyway, and so I graduated from college. The store was gone. I had taken care of my mother. My older brother had it, and I had to deal with him. I had to take care of Mom for 4 years and the store, and then we're going to sell it. I'm going to be free, and I was free. Started law school at the University of Chicago. Hated it. Just hated law school. Just didn't like. It's all memorization, and dropped out. Took some night courses in history and stuff like that. But basically, got a job selling whiskey and beer in a liquor store. And had no idea when I was 22, 23. I had read Saul Bellow, The Adventures of Augie Marsh. And I remember, I think I said this in the memoir, it was about a Jewish kid in the south side of Chicago who wasn't making it, and that was me. So I identified with it. So I just played along. I hadn't been free. So I was free, living $12 a week in some basement with cockroaches. I couldn't care less.
And where does the poker game come into it?
I had an apartment, and I moved out of it. One night in a bar, I ran into a guy that works for something called the City News Bureau. He actually, I was with a pretty girlfriend, and he actually bird dogged. Remember that word? You probably don't have that word. He sort of tried to hustle my girlfriend. And so he told me later that he worked for something called the City News Bureau, and he was going to work for Time magazine. And I said, what is City News Bureau? He said, it's a place where you could be a reporter, and half the people come from the Northwestern School of Journalism, the other half walk in off the street with a BA. So I went down and I applied. And months go by, I didn't know that hundreds of people apply, and they go through the stack. And I moved out of the apartment I was living, but I went back one night for a poker game, table stakes, pot limit, in which I had no money and had no business being, and I'm a terrible poker player. I was in the Army, I lost my pay every week. Anyway, I lose my money quickly, and it's about 1 o'clock, and I sleep on a couch in my former apartment. The phone rings about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I'm on the couch next to the phone. I pick it up, and it says, Hersh, wow. I had lived there for 4 months. Ryberg, City News, the editor. Your name's come up. Come on down, we're ready for you. $40 a week. So I started, that's how I got my job. And it was love at first sight, as I say. It was wonderful. Hassled to death. There was an editor named Bob Billings, who later I learned was a Joyce scholar, who was a night editor, who just rode me all the time because I was working night, 12 to 8, and I would bring a book all these. He'd always walk back and he'd say, what are you reading? And he'd say, novels, you never be a good reporter. I'd get an order for coffee and rolls, and he'd say, you're the dumbest Jew I know, you can't get the coffee right. That kind of hassle, be a fire in a manhole, 10 below zero in Chicago, and with the wind blowing off the lake. We have the same thing here off the lake. And he'd send me down to do a story about and I'd write up a story that he would tear up, because who's going to cares about a manhole fire? But they covered police, they covered crime, and I got my feet wet.
Well, there was a story about a police shooting of a black man shot in the back.
Oh, yeah.
You want to tell that story about what happened? I guess I should start by saying there's 1,000 great stories in this book, and we're going to try to pluck a few of them out here.
But it's about learning. I'm on the street, and I learn things. I'll just tell you a couple. One day, 2 cops were shot, and a cop killing, federal cops. And no matter what the cops, if a cop is shot, even if they're federal police, they were federal postal inspectors. And I'm working nights in City Hall, downtown, the main police station, and it was great. Same thing, working nights. I'd share the porn movies with the cops and the dope. We call the Mary Jane smoke joints with the cops. That's the way where you sort of like cops. 2 cops are killed, and I have an old Studebaker. I get out there, and there's blood all over, bullets all over. They're clearly dead, and I say to a sergeant, are they dead? And he's mad at me, mad at the killing, and he takes me, it's winter, by my coat and shoves me as hard as he can against the car, swearing at me, calling 50 different names, not until they're pronounced. And I'm the only reporter there, and City News works for the major newspapers. We report, we're the first rush. And if it's a good story, they may send their own reporter, or they may use what I write. And it's always the Manna, the Chicago Tribune or the Sun-Times. And So I didn't know what to do. I was the only reporter there. It was 3 in the morning. I waited for the coroner. It was fine. So I learned something. Not so bad to wait. Similarly, 5, there in the black ghetto, some guy went nuts and killed his wife and a bunch of kids in a fire. And I get out there, and the fire department has laid out the bodies in a row, Mama Bear, Papa Bear, by size. You never saw anything, so I was shocked. Neighbors told me some names, and I'm calling it in. Again, I'm the first guy on the street. And I was working the south side of Chicago. And I'm dictating to you dictated what you knew. And they rewrote it and sent it to the papers. And the night editor, a guy named Dornberg, wore dirty boots, gets on the phone as I'm dictating all excitedly. He says, my good, I remember like everything. It's like some of the first words maybe my baby spoke. He said, my good, dear, energetic Mr. Hersh. I was already known then as a guy pretty energetic. Are the last poor unfortunate victims of the American Negro persuasion? I said, yes, sir. He said, cheap it out.
He said what?
Cheap it out. That meant 5 blacks were killed in Southwest Chicago yesterday. So I learned about racism. One night, I'm working the night police. I'm listening to the radio. It's 3, 4 in the morning. Happens to be an Irish cop, and Chicago is very much dominated by Irish cops, and the Chicago Police Department was very corrupt. This is 59, 60, a lot of corruption. I mean, it's still one of the worst police departments in terms of black-white relationships, as we all know. And this cop was on the phone. He was saying, I'm bringing in a guy. He tried to get away, and I had to kill him, and he's coming, and the coroner's got him, or an ambulance has got him. I said, oh, wow, I had to kill a guy trying to get away. Innocent me, I run down to the parking lot. I was in Maine Police, and there was an underground parking lot for police squad cars. And I get there just as he pulls up, and another one of his buddies in another car says, oh, what happened? The guy tried to run in you. And he said, no, he said, I told him to beat it, and then I plugged him. He said, well, you know, just some garbage. So I heard it, and I heard it. I knew who he was. I call up my office, and they say, you're going to do what? You're going to write a story about that? Not in this news agency.
They wouldn't let you.
Are you kidding? They said, are you Chicago police? You're going to be a marked man. You won't be able to work. I kept my peace. I waited a couple of days, went to the coroner's office, looked up just asked for the report, saw the bullets were in the back, tried again to get him to do it. I was told you'd be driven off the force and we'll be in trouble if you do it. We get along with the cops. I was working a tyranny. The mob was so strong and police corruption was so strong. You could do anything you wanted as a police reporter in Chicago in the late 50s and early 60s, as long as if on one of the streets where the mobs controlled, the Rush Street was a famous street of nightclubs, and the mob controlled it, the Giancana mob. Same guy that was involved in the Kennedy, allegedly, in Kennedy, with Kennedy's girlfriend. Anyway.
Judy Exner.
You got it, Judy Exner. Well, good for you. He was dating her dating, whatever that means. At the same time, Jack was dating her. How's that? To use a polite word.
It's a very family way of describing it all.
Very well, it's family show, as you said. Anyway, so what happened is, if some guy was found with 14 bullets on Rush Street and it was reported as a traffic accident, you didn't mess with that. And that gave you freedom to do anything you want as long as you didn't mess with corruption or police brutality. So it was a tyranny. So I had to go in the Army. I sped that up because it was censorship, and I was involved in self-censorship, and I was always sensitive after it. I mean, I did it. I walked away. I didn't try and tell the story. I just walked away, went in the Army, thinking to myself, I love this profession, but it's far from perfect. And I was also far from perfect. I was capable of not doing something the same way. I went along. I mean, I don't think I had an option. But it taught me about, nothing's perfect, and it was a great lesson to learn. And I still wanted to be a journalist. I just thought that was a way of communicating. And it fit I'm obviously articulate and quick, and it fit me in a way.
Well, as we suggested in the intro, you have made a career of ruffling feathers along the way, and the biggest story that gave you the biggest splash at the time, I guess, is about 50 years ago. It's the William Calley story, is you discovering the guy behind the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. How did you find that story in the first place? Because that story, I mean, it had happened, what, a year before you finally found out about it?
18 months.
18 months, okay.
And covered up.
How'd you find out about it?
You know, I speak to journalism students a lot. What I say is, what's the secret? You know, that's the way to, and I say you got to read before you write. I fell in love in a perverse way. I was fascinated by the Vietnam War. And I got out of the Army, and nothing to do with the war then, had started in 60, 61, 62. But when it was the beginning, I was one of those people with the name David Halberstam, the famous reporters of the New York Times, Neil Sheehan, then of UPI, later of the Times, Malcolm Brown of the Associated Press. I read their stuff. And I used to go every morning in Chicago to a newsstand, out-of-town stand, to get the New York Times to read it on the war. And I began reading Bernard Falls. So I was interested in the war. And I wanted to be a correspondent. The problem is I got married, and they didn't want to send married people there. I'm happy I got married. I'm happy I didn't go.
You're still married.
Oh, yeah.
Same woman.
Same woman, yeah.
50, how many years?
54.
54
you
years.
get a good one, you got to keep them. I mean, you know, I knew she was a keeper. But I was too young, but I did it anyway. But that's a good thing to do. And in a way, it's a wonderful thing because it frees you for, you know, I had something else, another passion. I mean, she was a passion, but I had another passion. So I was into the war. And I eventually got to Washington. I was competent. I was good at the AP. I became the civil rights correspondent. I got close to Martin Luther King, and I, of course, fell in love with him. And the AP is a powerful organization. At least it was then. He'd have a demonstration, and everybody would be throwing sticks and stones, and he would just take it. And then, as the AP, we have 1,600 papers in America. And he would, after a rally in Chicago or elsewhere in the South, he would crook his finger at me. He knew I was simpatico, in love, smitten, I guess. And he would give me some words about Lyndon Johnson. And I would write an overnight story. And in the 50s and 60s, the afternoon newspapers were really a part of America. You go home and you have an afternoon news. It's gone now. They're all morning papers. You're lucky here. You've got 4 papers.
4 papers in Toronto.
You're an amazing place. And they all seem to be, I was at the Globe and Mail yesterday, and they seem to be thriving.
Well, they're all having financial difficulties, but they're
making,
hanging in there.
They're hanging in there.
Yeah.
Well, because, again, get out of America and you discover people, there's more news available. More people here are interested in news.
You know what I've discovered about you? You are such a great storyteller that you can take us right off the path from the original question, but I don't really care. I'm interested to hear what you have to say. But I want to get you back to William Calley.
So somebody says to me, I cover the war, and what I learned about the military, I got assigned to the Pentagon, and I learned that what you want is you want those soldiers who take the oath of office to the American Constitution, not to the president, not to their general or admiral, not to their boss, and you find them, they exist, and they find you because I'm somebody that was willing to work hard and write stories about hard things, and they would come
talk to you.
Well, they would sign somebody they knew that was willing to work. They respect people that work in the military. They respect people who go beyond what they tell them. So I got to know people, and I knew how bad the war was. It was hard to communicate it. Every time I tried, Robert McNamara would try and get me fired.
Secretary of Defense.
Secretary of Defense, who was, I concluded very quickly, was a psychotic liar. He wasn't quite that bad, but he lied about the war to all of us, and he knew how bad it was. Anyway, and so eventually I get to so much trouble writing about the war that I'm reassigned to Health and Human Services. So I leave and I freelance. I'm still writing about the war. And somebody comes to me from the inside and says there's something awful happened in Vietnam. A lot of people were killed, and it was a massive murder a year or so ago.
Just remind everybody, how many people got, this is women and children massacred.
Well, the numbers depend. 430 is a number that we acknowledge.
430.
But it's probably more than 500 because there were a lot of people they didn't identify. If you go to the memorial there, I didn't want to. But, you know, after 30 years, you know, living off My Lai was a big thing for me. You know, what do I have? A wife, children, dog, cat, the gerbil, you know, all the pets. Everybody wanted to go back to where I first cut my teeth. So we went back about 4 years ago, and for me, all of us went back to My Lai. It was very moving. I couldn't stop crying. I still can't think about it because I was in the Army. How do you do that? And I'll tell you something else that will come out. There was also sexual violence, unbelievable. That wasn't part of the story. We just couldn't do it. I couldn't figure out how to do it. I still may do something about it one of these days. Anyway, that was just unbelievable. But I didn't know it. I didn't know that. I just thought, oh, they'd shot up a village. You know, I knew that much from reading. I read the Bertrand Russell Tribunal. The Protestant churches put out 2 or 3 books about war crimes that nobody paid attention to. The New York Times, which a paper I always adored, and I did get there, but where I wanted to go, they weren't covering the kids who came back and said there's mass murder going on, but I picked it up in the Pentagon, having lunch with majors and captains and talking to them. Anyway, And so I knew there was something. I began to chase it. And I'll tell you what changed it for me. They had lied about this Cali. They charged Cali. There were eventually an investigation with 2-star, 1-star generals, colonels. 36 people were indicted, but one guy got sent to jail for 3 months. And when he was a clerk, he was the clerk in the jail. His job was to be a clerk typist in jail. I'm sitting, Cali, only one. Anyway, the cover-up of all time, still one of the great cover-ups. And so I didn't know what I was getting into, and I began to, I couldn't find much about it. I'm going because I had been in the Army. I know they keep records. It was not like the Third Reich, but we keep records. And I couldn't find anything about a serious incident like this. And I'm walking, I go back to the Pentagon. I was then writing a book for Random House about Pentagon abuses, financial stuff. So I had a press pass again. I'd been there in the building for 2 or 3 years, the Pentagon. I knew it well. And I see an old, wonderful Army colonel that had been very straight with me about a lot of things. And he's limping down the hall. I hadn't seen him in years. What the hell happened? He said, well, I got to Vietnam. I caught a bullet. And we're walking along. And he said, I'd been promoted, by the way, to general. And I go, you have to know what the Pentagon's like. It's black humor. I said, oh, you shot yourself in the knee to get a star, right? You know, we do that. And then he's laughing, and we're joking about it. And you can do that. You can do that with the good guys. They're bright enough to, there's some wonderful,
take the joke.
There's some good people in the military, good people in the CIA too. They're not all, don't believe in caricatures. Anyway, and so I said, so what's this about some major shoot-up that took place in Vietnam? I'm just saying, oh, I said, what are you doing now? He said, I work for the chief of staff, the senior general, General Westmoreland. You work for the chief of staff, huh? So what's this about a shoot-up? And he stops. It's one of those magic moments we have in journalism. And he takes his hand and bangs it against his bad knee, and he says, that guy, Cali, he didn't shoot anybody higher than it. He's just a wacko, and we're going to put him away forever. I had a name. And I can tell this like I am now, as if it's a good thing. I can also say, did I say to him, you've just given me the tip of all time, thank you so much? No, we don't do that in our business.
You played it cool.
You play it cool. And I said, thank you, and I went off and I got a name. I found a case. The story was he'd shot up a gin mill. That's what they were telling anybody who asked. He was being held an unspecified number of manslaughter charges, something like that. I would have missed it in a million years. And so from there, I had a name. I found his lawyer. I went out, got it. I eventually found him. I interviewed him, told me 15 different lies. And I had a wonderful lawyer. I was perhaps the worst student at the University of Chicago Law School. He was the best. My lawyer, a guy named Mike Nussbaum at a fancy law firm. I went to see him. He was a friend in Washington. And he said, he did the best thing I've ever did. He said, Cali probably lied to you, and he's probably lied to the Army investigation. You better call his lawyer and make sure that you know that. And the lawyer was very upset. He said, well, if you write the story, he's going to be convicted for sure because he did lie. He told you something different. I can't ask you to do anything, except I'll tell you what. If you'll somehow just say you knew what Cali said, but don't say you interviewed him. He said, I'll read your story, and any editor you want to call me, I'll say, if you make the changes I'll read it for accuracy. And he did. He was straight. He was a Mormon in the church, elder in the Mormon church, a retired Army judge, Army colonel. He was also a judge on the Court of Military Appeals. And so he was straight, and I did it. And report editors, and I write a story. Nobody wants to buy it. I see Cal. I have an interview with Cali. I have a copy of the charge sheet. Nobody wants to be the first to do that story. And I worked for the New York Times for many years.
You make that point about the Times. They want to be the paper of record, but they don't want to be first at anything.
I had to make them. It was a big. The one thing I did is I changed, and I quote other people as saying I caused the change. They hired me to do it, but then they didn't really want to do it. They didn't want to go after the president. I did Watergate, and I was writing stories. Anyway, it was a great institution, the New York Times, I wish they'd stop. I wish they'd do some things differently than they do now. But so what? You know, we older people always like. We don't like change.
But let me ask you, okay, that's a story that you did write and obviously got a great deal of attention for it, as was appropriate given the enormity of the story. There was another story that you discovered that you didn't write about, and I want to ask you about that one. You found out Richard Nixon beat his wife, and you didn't write about that one. How come?
Okay. I've been asked this question. It's the Me Too generation, right? And I respect it, and I can tell you, it's for the good. Because the sexism in the working place is enormous.
It's a reflection of the different mores of a different time. right?
It's a plus. It's a plus. I mean, I mentioned there were sex crimes at My Lai. You don't hear a word about it, right? Because just not that important, or whatever. You know, just woman. You know.
So what happened with the Nixon thing?
I'm asked to speak. I have been a lot, not recently, but for years I was asked to speak every couple of years to the Nieman Fellows, and it's always background. And so in '98, and by then half the fellows are women. You know, it's been a big change. In the beginning it was more men, but it's great, more women reporters. We have many of the best reporters now, of course, in major all over in every area are women, and that wasn't so when I began. They were always marginalized, even in '72. And so I tell the story. We were talking about stories that you didn't write, and I said, well, my wife's a doctor, and I have a daughter who's a doctor, and so, but I didn't have one then, but my wife then was a doctor. And Nixon left the presidency in the disgrace, and apparently within a week or so, hit Pat badly enough. And there was a hospital in California. He moved to California. And she was treated there for, you know, black eye and some cuts and stuff. And I was told by somebody directly involved in the procedure, right? And I mentioned that as the kind of story you didn't write because...
Let's remember, this is 1974.
It was 74, but I learned about it in 90 in I learned about it right after he left, so that was 20 years earlier. And that's part of it. You just didn't... Secondly, and it was off the record. I'm speaking to them off the record. I didn't know there was something called the Nieman Quarterly, which apparently didn't get that message, and they ran my interview in full text in their magazine, which they didn't. I don't think they'd done that very much with any interview, but I always make fun, you know, have fun with people, and so they ran it, including that exchange, and I mentioned it, and I said I didn't write it. Although I called John Ehrlichman was one of the senior people, and I even like John Mitchell. I get to know these
all
guys.
These Watergate guys.
Well,
you like them.
You get to like them. I mean, he was straight. I can tell you a great. I will tell you a great story. He's on trial, and he's on trial for about 5 charges. He went 9 months in jail, more than Bill Calley. For obstruction of justice and all those things. He was just a Wall Street lawyer who was dragged in to be attorney general. I had no idea of politics, and Nixon abused him badly. But he had there's something winsome about it. And he's having lunch in the middle of the trial with his lawyers at a fancy restaurant in Washington where we used to go on the New York Times expense account, happily.
In the good old days.
The Palm. And so there he is, and I knew John a little bit because I covered him, and he'd yelled at me a bunch of times. But I didn't go say hello. You know, I was the Watergate guy for the New York Times, and I was the guy that had to follow Woodward and Bernstein, who had the story beat. But
you worked well with Woodward together, right? You guys worked well together.
Yeah, no, I still
helped each other out on that story.
We worked together on some parts more than we told our editors because it was just too big for anyway. And I'm still his friend, and he had a great book recently. Anyway, he's fine. We have lunch. He always has a pad with things to do, and I always say, no, we're going to gossip. But he's one of those organized guys anyway. But a very straight guy, and very straight. Anyway, so I see him. I wait till after lunch, and he, as usual, he's paying for the lawyers, and he's the American Express card. And I sit down, and he gets the bill, and I say, "How's it going?" And he writes something on the car.
This is John Mitchell.
John Mitchell,
Attorney General, head of the committee to re-elect the president.
Middle of trial on 4 felony charges, and he asked me, and he said, "Well, you know how it's going." He said, "Oh, well, anyway," he said, Hersh, he said, "Here, wait till I leave before you read it." He said, "I'll give you a tip for the rest of your life." I said, "Okay, John." So he leaves, and I open it up, and the back it says, "Next time, take the 5th." So that's, you know, you gotta admire a guy that has that much humor. He didn't take the 5th. He confessed. He should have just shut up.
And he went to jail.
And he went to jail. Anyway, one of the few. So I have no idea where we were. Where were we?
Well, it was if you had to do it all over again, would you write the story about Dick Nixon?
What happened? When I said I didn't write it, I called Ehrlichman, and he said, "Oh, he's done that a couple of times." I said, "What are you talking about, John?" He said, "Oh, once during the war in Vietnam, you know, in 1970, he beat it, and once after he ran. Nixon had run for governor of California in 1962 and lost famously, and he said to the press, 'You'll never get a chance to beat me up again,' that kind of stuff that Trump does every day.
Won't have Nixon to kick around anymore."
Exactly right. Good for you. How do you remember all those things?
I read your stuff. You know, what am I going to tell you?
No, come on. That's a good recall. you know, when you're as old as I am, 300 years, you can't remember if my pants was zipped. Yeah, so there we go.
Trust
anyway,
me, they are.
And so what happened is, so I told them, I called, and Mitchell said they'd done it twice before. And so the woman began, and they said, well, why didn't you write it? And I didn't want to say because I would get somebody in the medical profession had broken every rule by telling me that. Mm-hmm. And as somebody who's in my family, I knew that I didn't want to say that. So it was off the record. And I said, you know, being the wise guy, I said, if I thought Nixon had gone looking for Pat and couldn't find her to punch her and bomb Cambodia, I would have written about his propensity for hitting her. But I meant that as funny. Didn't go over well with the young, bright woman there. And they made the point that it was a crime. Why didn't I treat it as a crime? And so we left it at that. And it was published in a couple of months later in their quarterly report of the Neiman in full. So I've been answering that question for years. The answer is, today I would know it was a crime. I'd be much smarter. I would immediately tell that person that's talking to me, stop talking to me because you can't do what you're doing. I would stop it there, but I didn't do any of that.
They're telling me in the control room, we got a minute to go.
Are you kidding?
Are you capable of telling a story in just 1 minute? Because I got one more question I'd love to ask you.
Okay, go.
Give it a shot. Do you consider yourself a straight-up journalist or a crusader?
How can you? I'm a straight-up journalist in a world when you need crusaders. That's what I am. I'm just saying that just from the top of my head. I think you need crusaders. I think you need crusaders right now more than ever. I think if I were at the New York Times, I would say, stop playing in his litter box with the tweets and write what's going on in the Department of Interior, in the Department of Energy. Write what's going on, the degradation that's going on in every cabinet level that we're not paying attention to because we're so focused on the man. And we're playing his game. The press is playing his game. And so if you're going to beat him, the Democrats have to beat him, not by calling him names, because that's not going to change the game. They have to beat him with coming out. That's what Hillary did. Remember, irredeemable, whatever the word phrase she used, something like deplorable.
Deplorables, right.
And you can't beat him by calling him names because he's not going to lose that crowd. He can't lose that crowd. He's got to be the tough boy. Right. You're going to beat him with policy. Maybe with Sherwood Brown of Ohio, who's a moderate Democrat that appeals to the working class. You're going to beat him with people who are going to come out with policies for the workers and not by attacking him. That's what that would be my crusade, but it'd also be good journalism to say that.
There are not many interviews I do on this program, and I think I've only done about 25,000, where I get to the end of it and I say, damn it all, I wish I had another half an hour.
Oh, you say that to all
I
your
sure do not.
All your clients.
I've never said it before, but this was truly a joy. I enjoyed the book so much, and it was a really a great pleasure to meet you. Because, you know, I've played at journalism for only about 35 years, and you've done it for about twice that. And you're kind of a serious dude in my eyes. So thanks a lot for doing this.
Well, I must say that your memory is amazing. Amazing.
Well,
good for you.
I remember enough to say the name of the book. It's called Reporter, a memoir by Seymour Hersh, and everybody calls him Cy. Thank you for doing this.
Hershevitz at one point. It went from Hershevitz to Hersh at Ellis Island. It could have gone to Klein or Apple, but it went to Hersh.
Cy, it's been a joy.
Thank you, sir.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.